can't tell you how much we love our speaker tonight. He was here at the beginning. He's, by the way, as if it isn't obvious, the only musician, true musician, on the board of the Wagner Society. He is a conductor of distinguished. He ran the Opera Theater in Northern Virginia. He's contributed in so many ways. He was a co-founder of the Emerging Singers program with Evelyn and Tom. He is a founder, I would say, of the American Wagner Project, which we continued with Delora and Luana. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. John Edward Niles.
Okay, here we go. Brace yourself. When I was 10 years old, my parents took me to the Metropolitan Opera, and I saw Parsifal at my request, ladies and gentlemen. I asked for this. I loved it. I didn't know a thing about what the plot meant. I didn't care. I was 10 years old. As far as I was concerned, it was King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And I knew the music. I had the entire third act on 78s, which I listened to over and over and over again. And it was a performance from Bayreuth, as a matter of fact, conducted by Siegfried Wagner, allegedly. So who knows? Anyway, I loved it. And the next year, I asked to go back. I was in 11, and my parents they got me tickets to see Die Meistersinger. Whoa, I was in heaven. I was in heaven. Now remember, I had been studying German in school, and in my junior high school, and I had been working on it with my parents. My mother was fluent in German. My father was pretty good in German. And so I was ready for this. I saw the opera, first act, and the thing that's great about Meistersinger is that each act ends with a great big scene with a lot of Germans running around the stage yelling at each other. And so here we have the first act ends with the confrontation with the Meistersingers, and with Wagner screaming at the top of his lungs, and the apprentices are laughing at everybody. The second act, of course, we have the famous fight scene. And then we have the third act. And that's where I got into trouble. Everything was going along fine until we got to the song contest. And then Beckmesser comes on stage. Oh my God. Now remember, I was an 11-year-old preteen kid here, okay? I knew what was going to happen, but still, with my knowledge of German, I was following along and I thought, what the heck did this guy do to deserve this? Everybody laughing at him, making a fool out of himself. What did he say? Well, I examined the thing, and what we're going to do today is we're going to look at this text, and we're going to look at this scene, which is not a very long scene. Oh yes, it sort of went away. Oh, thank you. And we're going to look at it to see exactly what he said. The important thing to remember now, when I first saw this scene, I got a hold of the text. I took it to my German professor in my junior high school, Mrs. Hempel. And I said, Frau Hempel, what did he do? And he said, Mrs. John Edward, it's very simple. He kept the consonants and he messed up the vowels in the middle. And that's what we're going to talk about. So, in order to understand a scene, any scene in Wagner, you have to be aware of the timeline. There's always a timeline. One of the most famous timelines in Wagner is in the second act of Götterdämmerung, when she confronts Siegfried and talks about the sword and the ring, and he says something completely contradictory, and they're both saying the truth because they're talking from a different timeline. Okay, So, here we have a thing about a timeline. Walter comes in, and now we're in the third act here now. He comes in and says to Sachs, I've had this wonderful dream. And he proceeds to sing 4 times the prize lead. 4 times he sings it in various versions. Each one is a little bit longer than the other. He changes the words. He changes the harmonic structure. I gave a lecture for the composition students at the Conservatory of Music in Cincinnati longer ago than my male vanity would like to remember, in which I explained the creative process, Wagner's creative process, showing how he changed each one of these 4 versions. Okay? So, here we have Walter sings a different version. Each time he writes it, each time he sings it, Sachs writes it down on a piece of paper. Now, this is a very important thing. This whole scene hangs on a piece of paper. 1 piece of paper. I don't know how many of you all know, but every summer I go out to Reno, Nevada to teach on the faculty at the University of Nevada in Reno with the Institute for Young Dramatic Voices. And the youngest group that we have are high school kids. It's called Opera Discovery. Don't know jack about Wagner. I talk to them about Wagner, and I talk to them about what the music is all about. And I explain to them that if you're going to be going into the career of opera, okay. You have to always be aware of the fact that as a singer, you're going to go out and have to do more than just sing. You have to sing, which is hard physical work, and then they put these clothes on you that may or maybe not fit you. Look, hopefully it isn't some awful color, and it doesn't have the body odor of the previous wearer. They shine bright lights in your eyes so you can't see. So they put all this nasty stuff on your face, which makes you sweat, which runs into your eyes. If you have contacts, then you're all out the window. And they put things in your hands. Props. Letters, daggers, swords, wine glasses, wine bottles, everything. And it's always pieces of paper. And that's what this scene hangs on. A piece of paper, a fairly large-sized piece of paper. Sachs writes down the text. He corrects him. He then sings it again. He corrects him. Each time he writes down what Stolzing has sung. And it's there on the piece of paper. Both sides. 4 times, 4 verses. What happens is that Beckmesser comes in, sees the piece of paper, and says, aha, you are trying to get the girl, you are my rival. And of course, Sachs says, hell no, I'm not going to want her. You want it? Here, take it. My song, I'll give you the song. But be careful. He warns him. This is not an easy song. Now, of course, Beckmesser is under the presumption that these verses are a song by Sachs. It's not his. He says that later. This is not my song. Here's the young man that wrote the song, and he comes in and sings surprisingly. Okay. He runs off and begins to cobble this text of Sachs into his already existing serenade, with the rather disastrous results. Now, let's take a look and see exactly what he does. By the way, I want to go out and go on the record here and say a very heartfelt thank you to Will Stewart for helping me in all of the technology here. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's take a look at this now, folks. W for Walter, B for Beckmesser. Let's look at the first line here. hobble up here to the screen. Right off the bat, it's morgendlich leuchten in rosigen Schein. Beckmesser, morgen-ich leuchte, not leuchten, in rosigen Schein, von Blut und durch becomes von Blut und durch geht schnell die Luft, geschwellt die Luft. Look at the difference in the translation, gives you an idea of what's happened here. Now, right off the bat, first of all, he separates the two words. Let me get out of the way here of the image. And then von Blut und durch, he drops the umlaut. Now, umlauts, those pesky little umlauts, those two little dots that they put over vowels, which change not only the pronunciation, but if they come into a noun over a vowel with consonants on either side, it not only changes the pronunciation of the word, it changes the meaning. Now, the classic example of this, I always say, is when you use umlauts in diminutives. One of the best usages of diminutives comes in the best Wagner opera that Richard Wagner didn't write, Hansel and Gretel, which was written by a student of his, by the way, who Humperdinck studied with Wagner. Ein Männlein steht im Wald, ganz still und stumm. A Mann, ein Männlein, a little man. Okay? You can also take a C-H-E-N and put in an umlaut, and all of a sudden you've got yourself something small. When I was in Germany working in the Opera House in Rostock, it was right after the Wende, right after the wall came down, I was conducting mainly musicals. And you haven't lived, folks, until you've done South Pacific in German. That was an experience I wouldn't wish on any of you. But anyway, they threw me a bone every once in a while as a, just to make me feel good and let me conduct an opera. Usually it was Zahn Zimmermann or Big Kauf the Braut, the Bartered Bride. But one or twice, I got to do La Bohème or Die Bohème in German. And I was conducting this opera with a singer who, by the way, was one of our Emerging Singers program singers. Okay, this is Brian Register. I don't know if you all remember the name or not. Yeah, Brian was one of our singers, and he now has a very fine career, in Germany now. He was doing the aria Che gelida manina, of course, in German. And at one point, the audience started to laugh. And we talked about that later because he made the mistake that a lot of Americans do. Wie eiskalt ist diesen Händchen? This is what is the German, Che gelida manina, your little hand. Wie eiskalt ist diesen, with a little apostrophe, Händchen, H-A umlaut N-D-C-H-E-N. A big hand, a little hand. Händchen with an umlaut. If you mispronounce it slightly, it becomes Händchen. Do you know what a Händchen is?
Chicken.
No. A puppy.
Oh, Hund.
Hund, a little Hund, a big dog. A Händchen is a puppy. Your little puppy is frozen. Well, so I mean that is something which happens a lot of times with Americans who, unless you use this language, I know from bitter experience of living in Germany and working in Germany for 13 years, unless you use a language every day, which I did eventually, you make these mistakes. And the mistakes that he makes here, as we go through it, are the kind of mistakes that a native German speaker would not make. Why the hell did he do this? Well, it's because Wagner wrote it. But I mean, you have to come up with a logical explanation. And Guillermo and I were discussing this before the lecture, and he guessed what it is. And a lot of directors have done this. They gave him glasses. Think about this for a minute, folks. He's vain. He's got these glasses. He's going to sing for the young lady. He takes off his glasses. He's reading the text there from a piece of manuscript, of handwritten text, and he can't see it. Makes perfect sense to me, and to most non-German audiences, it makes a perfect sense. Makes perfectly logical sense. I first saw this trick used in a production of Die Meistersinger in Chicago. Wonderful production with Julian Patrick. I don't know whether you all recognize the name or not. Julian Patrick, he was like the House Albrecht at Seattle for centuries and years forever now and then. And Julian was coupled with no less than Thomas Stewart as the Hans Sachs. And in this production, they gave him glasses. And I went backstage to the director. His name was Dino Yiannopoulos. He used to be at the Met for years until he went on to the faculty at Curtis, and that's where he retired. He did this thing with the glasses, and I remember him using this thing one time before. I'm sure all of you know Don Giovanni. In the second act, at the beginning of the second act, Leporello and the Don exchange cloaks. And they're going to try to convince this goofy woman, Elvira, that, Leporello is the Don and vice versa. And the production that we were doing, this was in Cincinnati in 1961. The opera and the operas in Cincinnati during the summertime were in the zoo. We did the opera house was in the zoo. It was called the Cincinnati Summer Zoo Opera. And I remember many times a soprano would hit a high note and there would be a squawk over there from a peacock. Beverly Sills said it was the funniest thing in the world. She was singing something, I can't remember what it was, and she hit a high C and there was a squawk over there. She turned around and says, "Oh, shut up." Audience loved it. Anyway, in this production of Don Giovanni, he gave Elvira glasses with Coke bottle lenses, so that all that they had to do was, once they got the two men made the exchange, he just took the guy who was doing the Leporello, just whoop, grabbed the glasses, put them in his pocket, and she was walking around the stage for the next 15 minutes half blind. Now, why did he do that? Because here we had Costas Pascalis as the Don, 5'9.5" or 5'10", 185 pounds. Leporello, Enzio Flagello, who was over 6 feet tall and weighed 250 pounds. Now, how the hell is that going to, these two people going to be mistaken one for the other? This isn't going to work unless you take away her glasses. And he used that same idea in Die Meistersinger. So let's sit around here and take a look at this again. The second verse there. It says, follow the B verse there. Wohl bald gewonnen, voll alle wohnen. Okay, you see what he does there? He keeps the vowel in some cases. And then and the consonants are on either side. Wie zerronnen, as opposed to the original was wie ersonnen. I always got the kick out of this. Im Garten lud ich ein garstig und fein. Garstig, that's a word that a lot of people use. I translate it as hard, it also could be nasty. So it was a very fine and nasty garden. Okay? So, and you will see, he does all these kind of mistakes because, because he if you want to get the idea, he couldn't see. Let's take a look at verse 2. Wohne ich träglich in selbigen Raum. I live passively in the same place, as opposed to wohne ich intragend. Not in träglich, but intragend. Den selbigen Raum, im selbigen Raum. Blissfully towering from that blessed spot, as opposed to I live passively in the same place. Hold golden Frucht, Bleistift, and now this is here. You see, goldene Frucht herrscht Gewürz. Okay? Juicy, the juicy abundance with fair splendor. Mit Hort am Pranger, this is also which I got a kick out of here. Mit Hort am Pranger der Verlangen, as opposed to mit Holden Prangen der Verlangen. He just got the two of them, he just reversed them a little bit there. Now, the important thing is we come up to these trees, and if you take here, which I think has got to be the funniest one of them all, take a look here. That's okay. Verse 3. Look there where it says, look down there at the very bottom. Gleich eine Braut umfasste sie sanft mein Leib, mit Augenwinken and Handwinken and so forth and so on. It talks about the tree of life, Lebensbaum, and Leberbaum, a liver tree. Okay, so there you have, it's kind of a sampling of what this guy did. Now, what we're going to do now is I want to go to the next thing here, which is this. And now, Will, ooh, there we go. Okay. Watch this and watch the body language here. Because I'm going to ask a question at the end of this to see if you notice it. Bows. I don't like the translation of the subtitles, by the way. Very freely translated here. It's not really, well, it's okay. Notice him here. Wipes his face. Unaware of what he said.
stand ein Volk. Sie schenkt und wollt, wie ich nicht besehen. Gleich wie ein Kraut und Faser, mir hat einen Neid. In Augen zwinkert, der Mund misswinkert, was mich vor lange verzwirrt. Wie vom Wort und kehrt wieder.
Okay, what happens here is that somebody hasn't answered their phone there yet.
I think so.
Oh, it's an alarm. Oh, sorry. Anyway, he says, they translate. They left out the tree of liver, which I think I was a little disappointed on. But he also violates. See, Beckmesser violates a very important cardinal rule when it comes to auditioning. Miss McConnell will be able to say what you say here. What's the main rule? What you do, what you don't do. Never sing anything you don't know. Okay, that's the rule. And there's another rule. Beckmesser goes out and sings this thing after having it in his possession for about 4.5 or 5 hours. There is no way in hell that he could have learned it in that time. Okay? I spent many, many years, sometimes very tempestuous years, working for Evelyn Lear and working with Evelyn Lear. One of the things that Evelyn taught me to always remember with an audition, if you're going to sing an audition, you have to sing something that you know so well that you can sing it in your sleep, and if somebody came into your bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning and pointed a gun into your face and said, sing this song for me, then you could do it. That's what you audition on. Don't sing something you know, oh, I like it, oh, I think it makes me feel good to sing. No. You sing what you know. And you sing when you are in good health. Never sing sick. That's the other rule, But, in very important now, what has happened here? Let me see if I push the right button. See, oops, wrong way. There you are. Now, let's go back here to the last line there. Gleich eine Braut umfasste. Like here, as opposed to gleich eine Braut umfasste, sie sank meinen Leib, bleich wie ein Kraut, as pale as a cabbage. Umfasste mir Hanf meinen Leib. So in other words, as pale as a cabbage, hemp wound around my body. Okay, this is where we come up with the tree of life becomes a tree long devoured like fruit, and wood and horse from the tree of liver. Now, these are all mistakes that he made. Now, I'm telling you this because I'm also going to be putting in my own personal experiences here. As I said before, I lived in Germany for 13 years, and was on the staff at the Opera House in Rostock. And it doesn't matter how long you live in Germany. For me, you will always be a foreigner. You will always be an Ausländer. They complimented me on my German. And they would always say, your German is very good for an American. Amerikanisch. And I learned that Germany is a nation of school teachers. You can massacre the language, and they will understand you perfectly. And then they will correct you in very good English. Perfect English. And they will do this, and so they give you a little German lesson there, right there on the street. And it's something which you just learn to deal with. And in dealing with this whole Beckmesser thing, I was dealing with people having trouble with the language. Of course, in this case, he has trouble with it because he can't, as far as I'm concerned, Wagner had created this thing where you have to give him glasses because most people just will not accept the fact that this guy would make these kind of errors. So here we have a situation where a man goes out and tries to, in a sense, appropriate. He steals the song. Now, the important thing is, he doesn't steal the song, he steals the text. And then he puts the text with this already existing serenade, and it just doesn't fit, you know? So, I don't know where it is, it's somewhere.
Where's that coming from? It shouldn't be that hard to pinpoint the location.
Oh, it's gone. So anyway, here we are now. Beckmesser, poor old Beckmesser, has made this error because the word Beckmesser, he puts this name together. Who was Beckmesser? He was a pedant. He was a man who followed the rules. Like a good German, he followed the rules. And there's nothing wrong in that. Sachs makes that very clear at the end of the opera. There's nothing wrong in following the rules, but that's only part of the story here. And you have to remember that there's more to it, because with each successive time, now this is where I wanted to show you what I'm going to be doing here. Put on my, you know, I'm over 45, so my warranty is expired. So here we go. First time. You all recognize that. Sorry. That's it. That's all he sings the first time. So if you look at the text here now, the second time he does sings approximately the same thing, except that he changes a little bit of the ending. He does. So he's got a little bit of the first verse and a little bit of the second verse. Then he comes in with the third time, which is basically the same thing, except that he does this. Now watch. Again, each time he gets closer and closer and closer to the final version. This is Wagner's creative process in motion. And it's a very, very wonderful picture of how this man's mind works. And what is so amazing is to see how he changes. The changes are very subtle and very, very, very carefully done. But you can see where Wagner is coming from. And you see, years before all of this, when Beethoven died, there was a lot of scholarship about Beethoven that came out thanks to a student of his by the name of Ries. Anybody ever heard of the compositions of Carl Ries? Sounds like Beethoven. He was a student of Beethoven. Wrote several symphonies. They all sound like Beethoven. Not very good Beethoven, but it does sound like Beethoven. Reese was also the one who edited, oh, there it goes again, our friend. They came out with sketchbooks. Beethoven, because of the way in which he had to work, had these sketchbooks, and he would work out things in the music, in his various compositions. And these were being released and edited. Wagner had seen these because he saw how Beethoven worked. And so this is how Wagner worked. Wagner created, within the context of the music, a slightly new, and he would make slight changes, little tiny alterations. That's the genius and the wonder of this scene. I love this scene here because it shows Wagner at his best. Now, let's be honest about this text that I pulled up here. Wagner wrote this. He was being mean. He was being mean-spirited. I mean, come on, that's vintage Richard Wagner. But he was doing it for a reason. Wagner never did anything without a reason, even when he was being slightly vindictive. He meant it. It had a purpose. And the purpose here was to show how what he believed the great wonder of personal creativity. That's what it's all about. Because as we see with these four versions that he sings of the Prize League, you hear how Walter Wagner is building on what happened before, just before. And we see a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more until we finally have the final result and the final product at the end of the opera. I feel sorry for Beckmesser. I really do. I feel sorry for Beckmesser because he's his own worst enemy. He shoots himself in the foot, and how you want to end, how a director wants to end it in the third act. Do you want to do it with him just running away and we never see him again? Or do we have him sometimes coming in and shaking hands with Sachs and, becoming reconciled to it? Who knows? The important thing is, I think that Beckmesser and Alberich are the two persons. I think you just give another. It will come back. Here it is. It are the two people in Wagner who really get a kind of a raw deal, sometimes by their own doing. But I always felt a little bad for Alberich, even though he's a jerk, and even though he doesn't deserve my sympathy. I feel sorry for him. And I feel sorry for Beckmesser. Both of these guys make egregious errors to their beloved German, and also they do egregious errors as far as their own personal judgment is concerned. It's interesting to point out, as I pointed out to you in the clip there, you notice at one time there where Beckmesser does this, and all of a sudden he realizes, oh my God, what have I said? And he realizes by the end of that second verse what a fool he's made out of himself, and so he just plows through and comes up with his tree of liver. But this is what can happen when somebody is so ingrained with following those rules. He can't see to the left or to the right. He just goes right straight down his own path. It's just like, I have to share this with you. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. It was raining. It was on the Sonnenstrasse in Munich. And I was standing there. There was a little old lady over there on the other side. And I was standing there, and it was raining. And then it stopped raining, and I was standing there. And I walked against the light because I didn't want to stand in the rain. And she began to yell at me. On the other side of the street, she began to yell at me. And I stood in the middle of the street. There wasn't a car, a streetcar. I mean, it was 2 o'clock in the morning, for God's sake. And I said, "Was ist euer Problem?" And she said, "You don't listen." And then she said something that only a German would say. She said, "What if a child saw you and followed your bad example?" I said, "Madame, it's still 2 o'clock in the morning, by the way. Where's the kid? Where's the child?" And she said, "That's not important. No. Principle. It's just the principle." And then the light changed and she could walk. And as she walked past me, she hit me with her umbrella. And she cursed at me. She said, "Gott verlassen der Amerikaner." So I learned that was my introduction. Welcome to Germany, John. And so I learned, the hard way, with a slightly wounded back of my legs there. Beckmesser is one of my favorite characters because I see, he can't cope. He can't cope with the fact that this guy is going to win. And he knows it. And in this production here, if you get a hold of the Goetz-Friedrich production, when he starts to sing in the beginning of the first act, and he begins "Fangen an," Beckmesser suddenly comes from back of the marker's booth where he's hidden, and the look on his face is like, "Holy mackerel, who is this guy? I am in trouble." Mm-hmm. So already, in the beginning of the first act, a director, you see, this is where, and again we have this, how much can a director do, how much liberty does a director have, like Dino Yiannopoulos with the glasses? And Goetz-Friedrich, with that particular notice thing in the audition, Stolzing's audition. If you follow what the score tells you, Richard Wagner stages his operas for you. If you look at the music, it's there for you. He was a stage director. He was a theater animal. Do what the composer says to you, and you can be have all kinds of concept, but never lose sight of where the music is going. Because if you do that, then you don't have to have, when you run out of ideas for music in Wagner, you don't have to have a couple of crocodiles come on stage and eat. And I'm serious. I'm not making this up. Yeah. Come on stage and the crocodiles eat the forest bird. So hey, I know it's a concept. I wanted to close by saying, I feel that if this is what makes Wagner such a wonderful, wonderful subject and thing to always be examining, because every time I look at this scene and read this text, I understand, I see the wonderful things that you can always find, and if you go back into this text, you'll find something new. That's what's so wonderful about it. So, thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you all have a very nice evening. Does anybody have a question for me? Yes, sir.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. Do you see anything in the phrasing, the translations, the mistranslations by Beckmesser that support the proposition that it's a figure like Eduard Hanslick or that it's anti-Semitic?
No, I don't buy into that. I'm sorry. I know there's some people that, sometimes people do that, that he is a Jewish caricature. I don't believe that. I know some people do. Just as they think that there's a Jewish caricature in Mima or in Albrecht. Perhaps in those characters, I don't know. The jury's still out on that. But you see, he was the clerk of a major German town. He would have never had a Jew in that position. Come on, be logical. You know? No. It's a nice idea. I've seen it, and of course they used it, in the more recent production in Bayreuth. Okay, chacun son goût. I don't agree with it. That's all. Anything else? Anybody else? Yes.
Who was the Beckmesser?
Oh, the Beckmesser. I can give you his name right now. He is a roster. He's on the roster at the Deutsches Oberberlin. And I have his name written down here. His name is Eke Wilhelm Schulte.
Who?
Eke Wilhelm Schulte. Schulte. And he is, as far as I know, he's still on the roster there. He's quite elderly. But Beckmesser was one of his roles. He's a very famous Beckmesser. Any other questions? Yes, Jim.
If you were directing a Meistersinger, would you have Beckmesser sing as beautifully as possible, or would you have him sing in a less beautiful way?
Do you want it to be a parody, or do you want it to be real? He would have never, Beckmesser would have done his very best to sound as good as he could. That's the realism here.
He was a master.
Exactly. He was not.
He had to have earned his stripes.
Exactly. This is why to come in and have him sing, in a ridiculously parody manner, I think is wrong, because it doesn't fit the character. It doesn't make any sense. Just like the fact that Beckmesser would be Jewish. A Jew would never be put into that position. That kind of maybe, but I doubt that Wagner would have done it. That was his intention. So no, in answer to your question, Jim, no. If I were doing it, I would have him sing it as well as possible. Just someone like Julian Patrick. Even he was really, really rough and very gruff and rumbly, when he was singing Albrecht, but there was no Albrecht in his performance of Beckmesser. He was wonderful. And he was a very, very fine singer, a very fine actor. I worked with him after he had retired from the University of Washington in Seattle. And I did a production of Fiddler on the Roof with him. He was Tevye. Excuse me. And he was very good. He was an excellent actor and a wonderful singer. Any other questions? Thank you all very much.